storms. And then we went through those dry winters, which did the snowmobile industry in. And I'm concerned we're in a cycle where we're going to get 2 or 3 bad winters in a row, which is really going to hurt.
Well, there are lots of issues if climate change is what it is, and we continue to see warmer winters, and I think that could do an awful lot to our tourist industry and the ski.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah, as well as to the snowmobile industry. So
you're going to have to double the snowmobile registration, John, because you're going to need snowmaking equipment, like the ski area's got.
The day I invent a groomer that puts out snow behind it, like an inch an hour, that will be my million.
There you go. That'll be the answer.
You'll have earned your retirement at that point.
For sure, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here this afternoon. And so here we are with Group 1, public use. And so what we're supposed to be looking at is the types of use, public use, it's being made of these public easements that are left over from abandonment and discontinuance. What's the need for that public access? What's the impact, positive and negative, of those public access routes? And for the negatives, what are the solutions, or how do we minimize the negative impacts? So what we tried to do was start with a chart, a matrix that would put all of this into the 4 columns. And we worked on that in our first meeting as a subcommittee. We brought that back to the overall commission, and commission members and some of us had some ideas as to how to make that chart better, how to improve that. What I tried to do was update the chart with all those changes. And how'd I do?
It's a
Did I miss something?
Document.
There's some things that are missed. I think, with regard to types of use, the one that I'd missed the first time was conservation easements, and that's something we've added to that first column. As far as the need for access, you need the access in order to make the desired use. For residential access, it's for your vacation home, or it's for, as in Roberta's case, for the regular residents. For commercial, industrial, it's for all the various types of work that you'd be doing. It could be logging, it could be transporting wood, it could be transporting mineral, sand, or stone from the gravel pit. It could be industrial equipment or chemical access. Generally, it's because there's no deeded access, and that's why folks are happy to use these public easements. Farm agriculture use to get to the land. With regard to recreational access, usually it's for passive recreation, but there are instances where folks want to use their bikes, their motorized bikes, their motorcycles, their e-bikes, ATVs, snowmobiles, trucks. There may be hunters out there. So there are all those types of recreational access, conservation easements. Sometimes those conservation easements are such that people are going there for passive recreational activities. Sometimes those conservation easements are just forever wild and don't want the public on there. So maybe some logging to maintain the property, but that's about it. And then, of course, there's the other types of use that we don't want. People are out there having parties, criminal activity going on. And then the wandering people, which Roberta had us add to this list, the folks whose GPS is taking them anywhere it says to go, which may or may not be right. We've all been there before to various levels of success with GPSs. And then as for impacts, we tried to take a look at it. I mean, for the most part, whenever people are using a gravel road, there's going to be somewhere, and that's why they're maintained. You have annual grading, but when you have use during spring thaw or after huge rain events, you can have ruts. And those ruts can lead to further erosion as the water gets guided along those, and washouts. So it can be ATVs, it can be trucks, it can be the UPS truck, it can be the oil truck, it could be anybody. It could be cars, it could be people in their SUVs, as well as pickup trucks. But all of this use can result in damage depending on when it happens and the weight of the vehicle and how it's operated. So these are all the impacts that we see, the potential for heavy damage from trucks and SUVs and ATVs and all. Snowmobiles, not so much, but that can be a visibility issue in winter. For solutions, minimization, no, that's what the discussion was about. We started with the idea of there being a tax on heavy vehicles, but that would be difficult to administer and difficult to apportion. So we moved on to a limitation on heavy vehicles, and then maybe banning all use of a road except for people who need it for their access, because it's their only access. So what I tried to do in the memo to each of you was take a look at what are some of the tools that are out there right now under state law. And right now, the town has the right to close part or all of a way to winter maintenance. So if no one's living out there, it's just logging property, or it's just seasonal residences, the town can say, we are not going to maintain this road, we're not going to plow it, we're just going to put up a chain and say it's closed for winter maintenance, and that's it. That's one tool.
You mentioned one thing there. You said if there's no one living on it. The
Yep.
catch is that I know of at least 3 cases where there are people living on these roads who were there before the road was closed to winter maintenance.
I understand.
I think there should be something in the law that makes it clear that it's not intended that a town can close a road to winter maintenance if somebody already lives on it. Now,
Well,
if they close it to winter maintenance first, and then somebody decides to make their seasonal camp winterized, that's another question. I don't think the town should have to resume plowing on maybe a road that's not in condition to be plowed. And maybe that's where there should be an addition to the disclosure laws, that if somebody is buying a piece of property that is not maintained in the winter, maybe they should be told that before they purchase it.
I don't disagree with you, Roberta, but I think that may be beyond our job description, just because that's not an abandoned and discontinued roads issue per se. It's the scope of winter maintenance, closing a townway to winter maintenance, and that's something you're free to bring up with state and local government. But I'm just trying to go through what is there now, and typically, the idea is that no one's using the road in the winter, and so no one lives there generally. You point out the exceptions, and I understand they exist. But the idea is just if you have seasonal camps, you don't need to maintain the road, and in those instances, towns can close it, and they close it for up to 10 years. After the first year, they can revisit it. Again, I don't disagree with you that there are some instances where maybe it's not such a wise idea, but that's really beyond what we're supposed to be looking at.
By the way, before I go any further, is anyone else having trouble with the screen freezing up, or is it just me?
No issue here.
Okay, I'm zooming in from the university. I'm on lunch break, and things are quiet right now. They may get noisy later, and there's a water pump that comes on in the room next to me every so often. But hopefully I don't freeze up entirely, because I'm having gaps every so often where you freeze up for several seconds.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Let us know if it's a problem, but for right now, you're not freezing on my screen, and I think everyone else is hearing you fine. There is the ability of municipalities to post roads, and it's not just seasonal. It started out that way, but now it's any time of year. So if there are times where it's necessary to protect public ways, it can designate those public ways. It's in the same statute that DOT has that authority over state roads. So if there's a time of year where there's a need to protect the road by putting a weight limit on, no trucks, whatever, towns can do that, and it's a temporary thing. Usually it's a spring thaw you're trying to protect against. But if you had some, let's say that there's a rainy season in September or something like that, that arguably could do that. It's for public ways. And so in public ways under this Title 29A refers back to the definition of public ways in Title 29A, Section 101. And that's a very specific one, which is why I included it here. And it means a way owned and maintained by the state, a county, or a municipality over which the general public has a right to pass. We'll talk about that a little more, but that's the temporary restriction right that all municipalities have right now, that the select board, the town council, as the municipal officers just go put together regulations or an ordinance and close it temporarily or restrict weights temporarily.
I have some comments on that. I don't know if you want me to make them now or save them.
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I would not go about changing the definition of public way to include that, because public way was one of the definitions we were not having any problems with. So I'd rather not mess with it and possibly create problems. If it can be done in the other statute to say that that provision can be used for public ways or public easements, then I think that would be a safer way to do it. As you said, often there's a second mud season in the fall during hunting season. There's often a lot of rain just before winter hits. My mother used to say winter can't come until the well's full. So that's typical. There's often a lot of rain just when all the hunters come in and they end up chewing up the road. My third thought is that a lot of towns, I think, just simply would not do that. So is there some way that we can say that they need to do it on request of a landowner or a resident on one of these roads? I don't know if there's a way to do that, but that would make it a lot more user-friendly for those who actually need the road.
Okay.
I guess I missed the first part. What is it you want them to do, Roberta?
If they could put a weight limit on a road when it's in a vulnerable condition. And it's not just, I know you mentioned in there when paved roads are, the gravel roads don't hold up as well as paved roads, so maybe it needs to be longer. There's also the question of these roads are often narrow, which means that they're more shaded. So in the spring, it takes longer for them to thaw just because they're cooler.
Jim, is there a difference between the temporary weight limits that Roberta's referring to now, like in the fall, compared to the state law about spring posting? Like, are they the same law? I guess I've never really paid my same law. So the fact that the town can normally post their roads in the spring because of the thaw, it's the same process in the fall if they wanted to? Or
it's temporary whenever.
Temporary whenever. And there's no, in the springtime, there's no like mandated time that it has to be lifted?
No.
Okay.
And what a lot of towns do is they post it for a longer time than they expect it to be needed because they can withdraw the posting at any time. But if it ends up being a long thaw, then if they've already said when it's going to end, they can't repost it as easily. So they'll often, post that it's going to go through much longer than they think they'll actually need it, and just figure they'll retract it when it's not needed anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's the authority on the part of the municipal officers to the select board or the town council to put together ordinances regulating the operation of vehicles. Normally that's where do you park, how many lanes, fire lanes, those sorts of things that are done. But there is year-round traffic control that you can do under the municipal statute, and that's something that's exclusively within the authority of the select board or the town city council. So those are the tools that are in the toolbox for municipalities to deal with. The closing of winter maintenance doesn't seem to be appropriate here when we're talking about trying to preserve public easements. What seems to make the most sense is dealing with that same statute that's used for temporary closings for spring thaws for the DOT and for temporary closings at any time for municipalities. And there are a couple ways to do that. One would be to amend it, and this is what Roberta was referring to. You could amend the state definition of public way to say that it includes public easements, but that could be a problem because we have two types of public easements now. We have the public easement that's created by statutory abandonment, and we have, and in that instance, and in the instance of ones that are laid out to connect properties to town under 3022, excuse me, when there's a public easement that's retained, it's a public easement that is only for access by foot or motor vehicle. And motor vehicle, it refers for a definition to Title 29A, which excludes snowmobiles, ATVs, and motorized wheelchairs, so they would not be allowed. And so when you have two different types of public easements in the law, which is kind of scary, the other one's just open to general public use, when you say that the public way would also include a public easement, you'd be saying in there that the general public would have a right to pass, and yet that doesn't work with public easements as defined or as a result from two different statutes. It's a mess, and so I would recommend, if we're going to mess with this at all, it would be to amend that temporary closing statute to clarify that municipalities have the right to designate not only public ways but also public easements for these regulations to close temporarily in order to protect them. So I think that's probably the way to go, but I was going to prepare a draft, and that was going to be another attachment, so I apologize. I saw that issue and said, no, I can't really prepare a draft until I know which one we're going to mess with, which one are we going to amend. So Karla had picked up on my error in referring to an attachment that wasn't there, so I apologize for that. But at any rate, I think the better way would be to amend 2395 to say that it allows for municipalities to adopt regulations for public easements as well as public ways in order to protect them during these times of the year. What do you all think about that?
Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, in the memo, you talk about clarifying it with regard to public easements that it maintains, that I assume the municipality maintains.
Yeah, do we want to be worried? Well, if the municipality isn't taking the step to maintain it, does the municipality have anything to protect at that point?
Right, so we would support that, changing 2395, but only if it involves all public easements.
Yeah, I don't see why
just the ones that municipalities maintain.
Yeah, I don't see why it would hurt to do that, Jim. And then it would still be the municipality's option to do it, whether it's maintained by them or not.
Okay.
My question is, if the town has already voted to abandon and discontinue these roads, they did that because they don't want the headache of maintenance. How are we going to now go tell them, well, you don't have to maintain it, but you do have to protect the right of way, essentially, or the easement?
But there are examples of towns that are maintaining their public easements.
That's good to know, and I think it would be an education level.
Yeah, I don't know, Roberta, if you keep track of that, how many towns actually provide any level of maintenance on any public easements. That would be interesting to find out. Might be an assignment for MMA.
So as I recall, one of the issues we ran into last year on the whole liability protection was Rebecca insisted that all roads, paved, maintained ones and otherwise, are all actually public easements. And that's what hogged us up on trying to provide liability protection, because, you know, providing the abutters liability protection to maintain a discontinued town road is different than providing them protection to go out here on Main Street. And that was one of the things I thought that we needed to get clarified. Is it clearly different, or are all these roads actually public easements by law? Because she said that's what MMA's stance was.
Yeah, and
That's where you get into the poor choice of terminology, because the term public easement traditionally has referred to any public easement of any kind, which could include conservation easement, it could include a utility easement, a sewer line. Those are all public easements. But then we have public easements that are defined specifically as being roads that are open to use by foot or motor vehicle. So they're saying that a subset of public easements is still called a public easement. It's really confusing.
well, here's where the misunderstanding occurs, and what's the nature of a road? Any public road. There are some roads that towns, cities, the state own all the rights, the surface rights, the land beneath it, the fee, the whole interest, everything. Easement interest, whatever. The municipality owns it all.
Since
There are very few of those.
Since 1959, they've been required to take roads in fee simple, but before that, they were not required to.
And there's a presumption that when a city or town accepts a subdivision road, now it accepts the fee. That's since 1977. Before that, and for all roads laid out before, there is what's explained as a public easement of passage. It's not the term public easement that's defined in state law. It is a general public right to pass and repass, and it includes the utility easement beneath it, the utility area beneath it. And so that's what Rebecca was mixing up. She was mixing up that concept of the public easement of passage as what interest does the state or a municipality have in a road other than owning the fee, with the defined term public easement, which as defined under state law means all the old private ways and the leftovers after abandonment and discontinuance. So when I use the term here, public easement, I am talking about the very narrow leftovers after an abandonment or discontinuance, or something that was specifically laid out as an old private way or as a public easement now. Not the general theory of any old city or town street that might have been laid out or taken back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever.
Right, but how do
Does
we
that help?
change that in the law to make it clear? Because like Rebecca, that was her pushback. She said it applied to all of it. My
Right.
question is, can we, instead of saying public ways in public easements, can we just say public, it already says public ways, and say discontinued roads?
Well, if you did that, not every discontinued road results in a private way before 1976 or a public easement. Not every abandoned road does. So I don't think we can do that.
I think the only thing you could do is try to change the term public easement as you're defining it to something else. But I don't know what that would be.
And here's the problem with that. I agree. It would be really nice to have used a better term. But then you would have private way from 1821 to 1976, public easement from 1976 to 2024, and then whatever you wanted to call it, Ryan's easement from 1924 forward. And somebody would have to figure out what that term means and what this is in 2025 versus what it had been before. It would have been nice if the legislature had used a different term back in 1976.
But I mean, what we already have is that in many ways, which is why law enforcement isn't doing anything. The other thing to just keep in mind, I mean, law enforcement, state police, warden service, sheriff's departments don't enforce public ordinance, town ordinances. Unless the town actually has a police department or a, paid contract to the sheriff's department. None of these things, because we run into the same thing when they try to pass an ordinance on a speed limit for ATVs. It's not enforceable. The regular state speed limit is the only thing that's enforceable. If a town passes an ordinance in town and has their own police department, they can enforce it, but that's the only way. So we don't want to create something that has no ability to actually be enforced either. So that's why I think you're right in trying to amend 29A, because the state police and the warden service, probably less the warden service generally, but could enforce a prohibition under that. But I think the public easement is going to create a bunch of confusion, so nobody will.
Well, we can only work with what we have. And what we have right now is a definition of public easement that includes all the old private ways, and it includes all the leftovers from discontinuance and statutory abandonment, and it includes anything that's laid out for recreation easements to get to recreational areas. So that's what we have.
And you're confident that like Rebecca's interpretation, that it covers the other roads, is not accurate, won't be interpreted that way?
I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with that. I understand it's a source of confusion, but I'm comfortable with the distinction.
I still think what we need is a dictionary style definition that says public easement may mean any of the following, and then lays out what each one of them is with a number, so that you can say, this is a public easement definition number 1 or definition number 2, or I think that's the only way we can handle it, because we can't put a new term on it. As you said, it just adds to the confusion. And by the way, I stand corrected. You're correct. It's 1976, not 1959. That all ways accepted now have to be in fee simple.
But for state roads, I think it goes back to 1951 for state highways.
That could be what I'm thinking of.
And so it.
I mean, it's just giving them the option to do this anyway. So I'm supportive of it. I say we try to just add public easements in addition to the public ways, see what Rebecca and MMA have to say, and go from there.
One thing I'd suggest is, so we don't have a problem like well, if we were going to suggest that, I think we would suggest that as a standalone bill, rather than make it a section of a larger bill, because I can imagine that if we started adding all these changes together into one big bill, there would be something for anybody to take a shot at. And just let's maybe propose each of these ideas going forward as separate bills. Give them each, something would have a likelihood to pass. What do you think of that?
I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
I would agree with the single proposal, but the biggest from my seat angle is the enforcement problem, and we need something that will address that. So if this goes that direction, it's a win for both sides.
Well, let me follow up on the enforcement section just to see, how this gets enforced. I didn't research that for today, just to take that down another road, so to speak. But you and Brian have both raised that point, and I think it's important. So I will look at enforcement for our next meeting then, and that way we'll have that together. I can also have a draft ready so that you can see this, and then we can take a look at this and make a recommendation to the group once we have what the enforcement mechanism is, what that looks like, what the penalties are, and make a recommendation to the overall commission. And by making this, as Karla suggested and Ryan, making this available for any public easement, that means that it's not just one that the town maintains, but not picking on Roberta, but just using your example. The town does not maintain the public easement that you maintain for your access. But you would still have the benefit of there being maybe a mud season protection. And so what would we be looking at? Would we leave it to the municipality to figure out what to protect from, or do we want to suggest what weight limits there should be? Or the towns, Brian, as a manager, did you know that anyway, or did you have a good idea?
About what, Jim?
Well, what truck weights to try to limit?
I mean, the only experience I have is in one of the towns I worked for, we passed an ordinance that kind of went in tandem with the spring weight limit. We'd allow a permit if a logger needed to get on a road that we had posted a limit. We required a permit from them, and they had to post a bond so that if anything got damaged, we could collect on the bond to recoup our costs of repairing damages.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the actual weight limit, I don't know. Whatever, I think we just go with whatever the posted limit is on these seasonal not seasonal roads, but springtime postings.
Okay. So the idea is that we'd leave it to municipalities to come up with the actual weight limits that they would want, that they think are reasonable to protect the road.
One thing
Are
I
the
see-
current weight limits in law, Ryan?
Well, that's what I'm not sure about.
Isn't it 21,000?
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
it was the oil truck.
I thought that they were all, yeah, I thought they were consistent across the board. Whether that was from a state law or not, I don't know. But I think they're all the same.
I mean, that posting is I think that actual posting they get from the state, don't they? I
The
mean,
actual orange.
those are the same in all towns that get put up.
Well, DOT has the right to restrict weight or passage of any vehicle over any way. So they could say no trucks, or they could say no trucks over 30,000 pounds or whatever, when it determines that passage would be unsafe. And DOT
Right,
has.
but the postings that go up in the spring in all the towns, everywhere that the roads are posted, they're all the same posting.
I understand.
Yeah, because we buy those from the same vendor.
Right. Mark's Printing House or something.
White signs usually, but yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that's not provided to the towns. The towns have to pay for it.
All right.
But the weight limit, I believe, is consistent across the state.
What I see as being an issue here is that the weight limits generally are to prohibit big trucks. And a lot of the problem in mud season isn't the big trucks, it's the people with a four-wheel drive pickup truck. So they're going to be under the weight limit. And yet, if you post a weight limit so low that you prohibit all four-wheel drive pickups, you're going to prohibit the people who live on the road who have to have a four-wheel drive pickup in order to get in and out in the spring. So do you make an exemption for residents, or how do you keep the people who don't need to be there out and still allow the people who do need to be there to be allowed to be in?
Okay, here's the authority for state law, because we piggyback on it, okay? This is all under 2395. And so DOT can designate state and state aid highways and bridges over which restrictions on gross weight, speed, operation, and equipment apply during periods of the year determined by the department. And the department has rules, but that's determined by the department. And then municipalities within their respective jurisdictions may impose restrictions similar to those made by DOT under subsection 3. But there are exceptions. Any vehicle delivering home heating fuel or organic animal bedding material and operating in accordance with a DOT permit may travel over any county or townway without a specific municipal or county permit, and that a municipality may impose additional restrictions like that but can't require a permit. And also, municipal permits can't be required when there's a drought emergency for trucks carrying well drilling equipment. So that's it. So that doesn't say that you can't prohibit types of vehicles or that you can't set a different weight or whatever. It leaves it open to municipalities to come up with regulations that are similar to those from DOT, but it doesn't say identical. So there's quite a bit of leeway given there. Do we want to say anything about that, or just let them figure it out?
Jim, did you mention an amount? Because I had you muted because I called my public works guy while we were on the phone.
Yeah.
He told me that it's 23,000 pounds or less.
And I would bet that that's in the rules, but DOT, I don't have up in front of me right now. I was just looking at the statute itself, which does not have a number, but delegates that to DOT for rules.
And so all it says in the state law is that towns have to have something similar to?
Yep, and that DOT may restrict the weight or passage of any vehicle and could put restrictions on gross weight, speed, operation, and equipment.
Pete would know this.
Yeah, Pete would know that, and I can look up the rule. And we just have to be similar to it. So, but the point being that there are some towns where a gross weight limit might work, but there are other towns where it might be better to restrict types of vehicles. And that's Roberta's point. And I think we can leave that to towns to figure out.
Does this section of law allow that though?
It does say that we come up with restrictions similar to those of DOT. It doesn't say they have to be exactly the same.
My concern here is that we'll see the same thing that we see with towns being allowed to use section 3105A for maintaining public easements when it's in the interest of the public for fire and police protection. And Ryan, I think you asked how many towns actually do that. I would love to know the answer to that, because I know that Jim, in your case, and in Rebecca's case, you've seen towns that do actually do that. And yet I've got 250 towns pinned on my map where I have people complaining that the town isn't doing that. They wouldn't be complaining if the town were providing maintenance, and they're not. So it would be wonderful to know how many towns do that and under what circumstances they find that appropriate.
Or provide something other than actual maintenance. Like in the case of the road I live on, it used to be the town gave money because it was a public easement, and we'd convinced them to do that. But they gave our road association money, and the road association still takes care of the plowing and maintenance and things like that. But
okay, and the road association is over a public easement.
correct.
Which is something that Roberta objects to because because I think you believe it's unconstitutional.
But it started off as a private road. The road
I
association was formed over a private road, and then a few years later, the town accepted the public easement of
Boy,
it.
that's weird.
There are actually a lot of towns that do that. There were a great many towns that used to plow private roads in the winter just because they figured it was a courtesy to their taxpayers, older residents, whatever. And then when MMA started telling them, oh no, the court says you can't do that, you can't spend public funds on private roads, some towns simply dropped people in the middle of winter, leaving them scrambling for somebody to plow them out. And other towns said, well, we'll give you until spring to figure it out. We'll plow until spring, but then we're done. And then there were some towns that said, well, wait a minute, we can use this law here. We can declare that it's a public easement or accept it as a public easement, go through the proper process. And then we can continue this service that we've always done for years. Wyndham, of course, is an exception to that because they have so many roads that are private ways, or private roads rather, that they had to get special dispensation in order to be able to continue maintaining them by declaring them public easements. But there are a lot of towns that have, maybe half a dozen roads that they continue to plow by doing that. But the real problem is the roads that are public easements because they were discontinued or abandoned. And the towns will say, no, we discontinued that road because we have no desire to put anything into it, but we still want to use it. So we're keeping the public easement. And that's what the real problem is.
To be fair, it may not be
if they would do what Ryan says they're doing, where they would give money to the people who are maintaining the road, whether it's a road association or a single resident or whoever. And I've said for years, why can't we take something from the tax revenue that you get from these properties being converted from just raw land or woodlots or whatever, when they're converted to residential property, then all of a sudden the town is taking in more tax money. Why can't some of that tax revenue be put back into these roads if the public wants to be able to continue using it? If they want to give up the public easement, that's fine, make it a private road. But if the public still wants to use it, why can't the public contribute something to the maintenance? And the tax money would be one place to get that revenue.
Would be, but the tax money, especially residents, is going to the schools, police, fire, and that usually the cost of all those services outstrips with the amount of revenue that the municipality gets from a residential property. But
Well, in a lot of cases, the people on these roads don't get the benefit of those services. For example, on the south end of Young Road, we're all senior citizens. None of us have school-age children. We're almost on the Wayne border, so most of us go out through Wayne and don't use most of the roads in Fayette. We're not using the gym. We don't use the library because we're closer to the Wayne Library. So we're putting out tax money that the town of Fayette gets to use on other roads in town, and we don't see a penny of it. And yet we're told that the public gets to use our road for free.
you can hear the arguments, and we don't even have Rebecca on. No,
The money issue, though, is separate from the weight restriction. I mean, we can go off on a million things here, but I think the weight restriction or some kind of seasonal use restriction, Roberta's right. Obviously, 23,000 pounds on these roads is not going to solve anything, but I don't know whether you got to put weight in. That probably gets, MMA will push back on that, I'm sure, as will, others. But at least having it clear that they could restrict it makes, a step in the right direction.
Brian, I totally agree with you. That's maybe the direction we need to head, but if it's just wishy-washy, one town does it, one town doesn't, it's still not going to cure the enforcement issue.
No, I agree. I mean, they may not do it. I mean, what's interesting, it says here they may impose restrictions. I thought towns had to.
No.
But I guess they don't. If their response, see, the big issue is this. This is what, of course, this is Roberta's argument all along. The town's going to post a road because they don't want it destroyed because they got to fix it.
Right.
But if they don't have to fix these discontinued roads, then they may not post them because they don't care. So it may not accomplish anything on that front unless you somehow put some kind of language there that says if they don't post it, they're responsible for damage. That would get their attention, but it'd probably get their attention before it ever became law and it would stop it.
That's right. That's what I was going to say next. Thank you.
But I think in general, if the town has the right to post a public easement, this is my, glasses half full belief, and residents on the public easement, like Roberta or whoever, went to the town and said, hey, can you post our road this year? Because I don't think they'd all do it, but I think a fair number would do it, right? Just
right.
What's the harm in doing that?
Right. The excuse that they can't do it would be gone.
Right. The excuse would be gone.
Right. And folks like Roberta can say, we are maintaining this ourselves. We just want a little help so that it doesn't get dug up so quickly, and you're in a position to help us. Could you please adopt this, please designate this way as subject to this posting?
Roberta, do you guys post the road yourselves?
No, we're not allowed to post the road ourselves because it's a public easement. We've been told that it's open to unfettered public use.
Yeah, well, I'll just tell you up here, we don't follow the same rules because we post our public easement ourselves. We just get the signs from our local public works guy that we know. He gives us a few signs and we post it.
So how do you post it, Ryan? Is it a weight or a total closure?
Same thing as what a town does. We have the orange sign that goes up on the telephone poles as you come
But
onto
it's
the
at
road.
23,000 pounds. It's not.
Yeah. Right. We're not posting less than what their town roads would be.
So, I mean, if we did this, Jim, with this law, would the town have the right, the option, let's say, to not post it to 23,000 pounds, but to instead post it closed for mud season except to residences? Or something like that would this law allow that?
I think it arguably would. I'm going to take a look at the DOT rules, but the overall authority is DOT may restrict the weight or passage of any vehicle over any way.
Right. So the town could, in theory, say, we don't want any use during mud season
Yeah.
except for the local residents who live on it.
Right, and then there'd be that exception by state law for the oil truck or the organic animal bedding material with the DOT permit, or during drought season, the well drilling truck. But yeah, other than that, you'd say no.
That well drilling one, Jim, that's a fairly recent law, isn't it? Like in the last 20 years or so?
Exactly. It was about, we had a huge drought about 22, 23 years ago. It was passed back in 2001, actually. Yeah.
I remember.
And that law exists already that we just need to educate and enforce.
Now, is that a new law, Jim, completely, or was that just an amendment to 2395?
Just an amendment to 2395.
Which is the same thing we're proposing now, is to amend 2395 to allow them to post public easements.
Right. Make it clear that they can.
And then in theory, we could, work with education to try to get towns to post it so that, only abutting landowners have access while it's posted.
We could work with MMA to develop model orders that towns could adopt.
And that would certainly be a step in the right direction because, ideally, Roberta, they'd give you money to help, but if they don't, we can at least stop the other damage from occurring, then, the maintenance becomes a lot easier because they could shut it down, and then, obviously you can have a farmer that's in a butter who may be out there with bigger equipment or somebody logging or whatever else, but hopefully at least you get the abutting landowners all to be on the same page that, look, we got to live with each other here. Let's not damage the road. You keep, the rest of us, if you will, out off of it so that we're not doing damage just because we got nothing better to do but go exploring.
And then you run into the same problem that you get with the statutes that we already have that are supposed to protect public easements. There's Title 23, Section 3029A, and Title 17, Section 3853D, which are both supposed to have consequences if somebody damages a public easement with a motor vehicle. And the problem is that it's hard to catch the ones who are doing it because they tend to go through in the middle of the night when nobody's around. And even if you're there, by the time you go running out to see who it was, they're gone. So you can't get a license plate number. If you even do get the license plate number, then you have to prove that they damaged the road and prove the extent of the damage. So it's great in theory. It's nice to know that that's there if you can catch them.
Well, right, but we had the same issue on the ATV stuff, and that's why we passed the mud season law, because we could still potentially go after somebody and hold them responsible for the damage, but if if it's signed, then there's an automatic penalty if they win. They don't, whether they did damage or didn't do damage, doesn't matter. They were there, they're not supposed to be there. So if you get this amended so that law applies that way, put a camera, on the end of the road, then they could, law enforcement could easily prosecute people. Once they prosecute people, now you got a better chance going after them civilly if you got damage. So it's not perfect, but it'd be a big step in the right direction, I would think.
Another step in the right direction. That's true. I'll agree with that. How big a step that is, we'd have to wait and see if it actually works. But I'm certainly in favor of trying something that might help.
Okay. So then we'll go down this road, and I'll prepare a draft.
Intended.
No pun totally intended. And I'll take a look at the enforcement authority, who enforces this, and what the penalties might be. I'll take a look at the DOT regs so we have those to think about. But the idea here would be that it would apply to all public easements. It would allow municipalities to be able to adopt these orders to restrict weights or restrict vehicles. And we can, if this passes, we can work with MMA to try to come up with language so that we can get those results, and it'd be a little easier for municipalities to follow that. Does that all sound like a plan?
That's a good place to start. I do think that it would be helpful if we could get MMA to do a survey to find out how many towns do in fact contribute anything to maintenance of public easements. That would give us a little better idea of what we're working with. And I know Rebecca disagrees with me, but I go back to Jordan versus the town of Canton. Yes, the statute that was objecting to was repealed, but what the court said was that it doesn't matter what the legal status of a road is. If you have a public road with no public maintenance, the road will inevitably be destroyed. And this is what we've seen over and over again. It doesn't matter whether it's destroyed because of mud runners or destroyed because of erosion or whatever. If there's no public maintenance and the public is still using it, it's going to damage the road. And I know Rebecca keeps saying, oh, but we fixed that in the discontinuance law because now there's compensation when the road is discontinued. But if you really read Jordan versus Canton carefully, there is only one place in the whole decision where it mentions due process. And that's kind of in passing because it's in one of the statutes that it refers to. But the rest of it hammers on compensation. And it's not compensation when the road is declared to be a limited user highway or a public easement or whatever. It's damage as the result of continued public use with no public maintenance. And what they said was that there's no compensation for that and therefore it was unconstitutional. So we don't see why it isn't just as unconstitutional to have a public easement where the public still has use of the road and there's no public maintenance. And that's really at the heart of this whole issue.
Understood. All right, so I think I have my to-do list for what to do to fix this up.
Can we go back to the chart for a minute?
Sure.
So I'm curious on a couple of things. On the ATV stuff, it says roads can be too close to residences. So, I mean, are you saying that using the discontinued road is a problem because the house is too close? I mean, I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is that impact. Is that what that's?
Yeah, that's what it was intended to capture. I think we heard that from a few people.
So it's too close as compared to, I mean, there's a section in the law for both snowmobiles and ATVs, the distance from, from residences without permission. However, that doesn't apply if you're on a road, public road or, well, a road. So that's what I'm wondering how that impacts here.
You could be more specific by saying routes on discontinued or abandoned roads can be too close to residences.
Right, but the question is based on what? Not by law, they're not too close, I don't think, because they're on a road.
Well, I think there's a difference between say a town way or a state aid road or whatever and a discontinued road.
Well, I don't disagree with you. There is different. That was part of my pushback with Rebecca because they kept putting them in the same category, and that's what hung up the department on the liability issue. Is that if they're not distinctively different, then we got a problem because like access routes for ATVs are only on publicly maintained roads, not discontinued roads. And if you categorize them all the same, that creates a problem. And I think that's part of the question here, is are they different and does one apply and not the other? Because, if your house is 10 feet off the road on a public road, an ATV and snowmobile can still go by. They're not breaking any law. If you're out in the woods somewhere and the trail is right there, then that may be a different scenario if it's not on a road. But so the I think that needs to be clarified because I don't think you can just definitively say they're too close.
I think that's where you get into who owns the road.
Right. Well, and that's the big
Is it the
debate, I think,
abutter?
on so much of this. And I, the unfortunate part of it, we don't seem to have resolved that. Everybody's going to have their opinion and their fight back and forth as to what they're standing on. But that's always been the big debate from my end of things, because you have to have landowner permission to operate an ATV. Towns say, well, we got a public easement which allows them, and then we got landowners who say, no, you don't have our permission, so you can't go. And who's right and who's wrong? And that underlying scenario has resulted in different outcomes in different towns.
And you'd get different outcomes because there are two different types of public easements now.
I know, yeah.
And I think part of the issue there is that if you live on a public road, you're used to having traffic go by. Traffic goes by all the time. There are noisy trucks, there are noisy motorcycles, there's all kinds of noise coming from that road all the time. So having the noise of an ATV or a snowmobile go past because it's been designated as a connector route may not be much of an issue. But when you have these people who are out in the middle of nowhere, most of them moved there because having peace and quiet was really, really important to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't go through all the hardship of being on this discontinued road that they may have to struggle with access.
Right.
So
I don't disagree with you on that. But the other side of the coin is there are at least as many complaints out there where people, the road's been a trail, snowmobile, ATV, whatever, for right along. And now all of a sudden, we saw this a lot under COVID, people came in and turned camps into year-round residences or put up year-round residences or whatever. And now they want the trail stopped. And, the other side's going, well, wait a minute, it's been all along. And that's the other side of this debate. So.
A couple of things that might help. I know in some cases they're able to reroute the trail so that it goes farther from a house. That would depend possibly on permission of the landowner on the other side of the road, which may
right. But that isn't always in the, if I'm that other landowner and I'm fine with it on the road, all of a sudden, because you want it on my land, because you don't want it on the road, how does that set with me? I mean, I run into that on a regular basis. And that's frankly what leads to a lot of the fights between the abutters over these road issues. Because they're like, they were fine as long as it was on the road, but now you're trying to move it onto my side, and that takes away from me, and I'm still paying the same taxes. And I hear those all the time.
Another thing that might help, how about having speed limits where they're going past a house? Because what's really annoying is when they go by going and really screaming past, and that also does more damage to the road.
If you enforce that.
If you cut the speed limit down and said they just have to go put, put, put as they're going by, we have neighbors that have an ATV and they just put, put, put down the road and it's not a problem. But we have other people who come through, and on the snowmobile particularly, I find it's kind of comforting to hear them, just putting through the woods, but then they turn the corner and they step on it and they take off and there's this whine. That's the annoying part. So maybe if we said, within a certain distance of a house, they have to have a speed limit. That could help quite a bit with that issue.
Yeah, I mean, the whole speed limit thing is an ongoing debate. And John, I'm sure can weigh. I mean, New Hampshire has a statewide speed limit for ATV and a statewide speed limit for snowmobile, and a lot of people, don't like them. Some like them. Enforcement of them is a whole nother nightmare. The only thing that really is going to be enforceable effectively is a statewide speed limit. If you've just said, ATVs can't exceed 25 miles an hour ever, then, that becomes law out there and then potentially enforceable. But most of the time we get pushback from all kinds of different people, including agencies who don't want to get involved with, even MDOT, who says, look, we don't want ATVs going 25 miles an hour on a road that's 45 miles an hour, because that creates a hazard. It's obviously, we have the same conversations going on there, when you got horse and buggy out there too, and people concerned about those things. So I don't know. the speed is an issue, but most of the time, what we've found, I know like in Jackman, they complain about speed of trucks and ATVs. And when they put up those, speed limit things with cameras on it, recorded all the data, in the end, they found out that like 1% of the public was actually going too fast. It just appeared like they were or sounded like they were. One of the biggest problems, ATVs with, tractor-like tires, if they're going down the road even 35 miles an hour, it sounds like they're going 100 because the tires just so loud. And that's an issue that the only effective way to enforce that is to just have a statewide speed limit because, again, particularly out there, wardens don't even have radar. So who's going to enforce the speed limit effectively? They're going to have to follow them at the same speed to prove they were going too fast, which just creates more issues.
Is there a possibility of the ATV clubs policing their own people and saying, look, if we exceed the speed limit, then we're going to lose permission to use these?
Well, I mean, they tell them that. I mean, I think most all the clubs would and do that, but they're not police, and the law enforcement have made it very clear they shouldn't try to be police because invariably, the innocent one is the one that ends up in trouble in those scenarios, and so they don't want them doing that. And the whole permission in this case is a big debate anyway as to who can give permission. So I agree with you. I think people should behave better and make better choices, but it's very difficult. I mean, we find, I don't know, John, you probably know better than I do, but I don't think more than 10 or 15% of the public actually belongs to a club.
We got data trying to brew on that right now because it gets skewed where I register 3 sleds and I belong to 7 clubs, but I only get logged as 1 primary. So the data, if every person that joined the club registered 2 sleds, really gets confusing. I think it's probably a bit higher than people seem, but with 85,000 registrations, 24% of those being non-resident, that leaves 60,000 residents. And if you're registering 2 sleds, that means 30,000 should be registered. Well, we have a membership of 12 to 15,000 a year. So the numbers are off, but it could be the guy that registers 5 sleds and 1 guy registers 1. So there's really no convenient way to put numbers that lay on a table nicely, but
I mean, so Roberta, we've tried, MSA's tried, ATV Maine's tried to not make mandatory, but to put a club member discount in place so that it would encourage people to join clubs so they would, get better educated. And the legislature's rejected that. I think we've tried between us all 3 times, John, and it hasn't gone anywhere yet. So, I mean, that would potentially be a fix because that's what Irving has always said in Aroostook County is they want people riding on their land to belong to local clubs so they get the message that Irving has for people so they behave correctly. And they did that with ATV. They may start it on snowmobile because they've had real issues with snowmobile and off trail and on plantations, particularly in areas where the snow is so deep, you can't even tell there's one there. People think they're going across the field and turns out it's a plantation, or down east it's a blueberry barren. And so again, getting people to ride where they're supposed to and the way they're supposed to is an education thing, and the more we can reach out to them, the better. And we are trying that, but there's been pushback from the legislature and others as us being too overbearing on people.
Well, maybe if we get more organizations behind that effort, in other words, get the commission behind it and maybe think of any other interests that could join us for that. Maybe we can have more clout with the legislature.
Ironically, we had that meeting this morning from the MSA side having a discussion of the mandatory membership again, and mandatorily requiring somebody that wants to just recreationally play is a tough coin to push down somebody's throat when we're just volunteering our time to kind of keep the system going as it is. I will share from observation only, the ATV community in the last 3 years has definitely stepped to the plate, like Brian mentioned last time about having the mud season. Yeah, the first year they boxed extremely, but now it's kind of they've grown almost like a sled season. When the snow goes away, the sled season ends. But there's just no way we'll ever cure the 5% rogue people that are causing our issues to begin with. It's the bad eggs that are just going to continue to. We can make all the rules we want. They're going to avoid the cameras or tear the cameras down. So,
Yeah, and people are ruthless. I mean, I see it on Facebook, you know, the local club president makes his big post, stay off the trails until this day or whatever. And then all of a sudden people just come out of the woodwork attacking them like, no, why can't we be riding now? You know, it's dry over on this road. And like, okay, maybe it's dry right there, but it's not dry over here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's why we have to do, that's why they pay me the big bucks to be the bad guy, right? Everybody gets mad. Why haven't you opened that trail yet?
why are you retiring then?
And we one end, like Newport, the Newport to Dover Trail, Four Seasons Trail there. I mean, routinely every year, the parking lot, we have to keep the parking lot gated because the parking lot's dry, no snow, everything's fine in Newport. There's still snow on the trail in Dover. Not everywhere, but it is in that stretch where you go up by the bog and it's all like you mentioned, Roberta, earlier. It's narrow, it's a lot of tree cover, and it just takes longer. And people drive by the one down there in Newport and throw me under the bus. You're just ruining all the fun, but that's the reality of the situation. But I think if we can get something in the law that allows, and we develop a sign that white signs got, and maybe we can even work with MMA and others to hand them out initially to towns and say, look, you can put these up to prevent damage on these discontinued roads to help the abutters. I think that'll go. I mean, like John said, people balked initially, and there's some that still do, obviously, but they complain, they scream, they call me names, but they still stay off, the majority of them, and that's the point. Call me names all day long, just stay off the trail until we open it. I don't care.
Yeah, I think another place that we could start is to clarify who it is that owns the road when it's a discontinued road. I think if we could say that the landowner is the owner rather than the town, I think that would help a great deal.
Well, I think state law already says the abutters own to the center line, but the town retains the right of public access or control over that right of public access. So then the question is, who do you approach, the landowners or the party who controls the public access?
Well, I mean, in theory, the town who controls public access would be under what we're proposing. They'd be the ones that could sign it closed or restricted, right, or whatever.
Right, but as far as allowing permission to ATV owners to be there or snowmobile.
Well, and that's the big. I mean, that goes on now, Jim, all the time, because I deal with towns. We're going back to Thorndike in Jackson this week. That whole debate is out there, and the towns are insisting that they have the authority, and others are saying they don't. And how do you know who's right? I mean, I've seen different towns rule different ways in different locations, and the language isn't always the same, and the dates of things abandoned and how they were abandoned and whatever is not only not the same. Half the time they can't even tell you when it was done.
Right.
I was just going to add that, like, the last month or so, I've actually gotten quite a few calls from towns asking about abandoned roads, how they should handle it, what's abandoned, what's been discontinued. I've been a little shocked by that because I feel like the towns should probably know what roads are abandoned or discontinued. But there is an increasing call to me about looking for advice on what to do and how to handle that. Yeah, so I know that we are just a legislative consultant, and that's all I have said back. But I don't know if that's something to discuss later on moving forward, or if we even want to be in that position, or if we want to farm that out to somebody else. But I get a lot of calls now, so that's all I want to say.
My suggestion is that if they are town officials looking for advice, I would direct them over to Maine Municipal Association Legal Services, because that's who's there to help them.
Okay.
If they're individuals, I think Roberta's hand is going to go up.
It already did. You didn't see it.
I did.
Well, yeah, I know. I'm just cautious though, because I've been warned not to advise on anything. So
So how about telling them that the DOT has a lot of that information? And
I
when
do.
When you refer them to the DOT, then they will refer them to me.
I say that, and I say, you know, and some of our commission members, you know, have a lot of information, and you can research the commission members and see.
Yeah,
But that's how I've
there are
left it.
some resources out there. For town
Yeah.
officials, there's MMA. For the public generally, there's MDOT. And for those who are particularly interested in their individual rights on public easements, there's Maine Roadways.
Okay.
So, you know, they're resources. We're not telling you that they have the answers, that they're, but they're resources.
All right, I'll word it that way, that
Can't
they're
get
resources
in
for them to
trouble.
do their research on.
Yeah, you can't get in trouble for just saying, here are some resources.
All right.
And the problem, Heather, is much like we also see with snowmobile and ATV clubs. Somebody new gets voted in as club president or whatever, but they don't have the history, and they're calling us up going, when did this happen? And how is this done? And sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't, because it's really not our bailiwick. But there's a lot of these people in the towns, they weren't around when those roads were abandoned, and, you know, different people have got to go research it, and then people do, and they don't all, you know, as Roberta can say, they don't all agree. You know, one will say, well, this is what happened. Somebody else said, no, this is what happened. And meanwhile, it happened so long ago, none of us were even alive in many cases. So
I know. I've gotten 5 calls in the last month on abandoned and discontinued roads. So because and I'm like, no, we're just the legislative commission. Like, we don't, but like, there's a lot of calls out there. I wanted to just say though, for a database or something where they can go and look at abandoned, discontinued roads. But I was like, you need to look at your history, and
Here's an idea. Tell them to Google discontinued roads Maine.
Okay, I will. Next time.
And you can tell them
But
about
that doesn't say you're recommending anybody, but when you Google discontinued roads Maine, there's going to be a bunch of resources that pop up. You can check into them and see what you find.
Yeah, I was surprised I've been getting calls, because I haven't gotten any, and I think now the website is up, and I think it's starting to make traction. So anyway, just that.
And Maine DOT has its map viewer, so people can look at that for whatever information they can get from it. So
right, that's not going to tell you necessarily. I mean, it's just going to tell you the status currently, but
right, they'll tell you whether it's publicly maintained or not, but that it won't tell you what the legal status is. We know it's failing, but that's also not what it was intended to do. So.
Except that if you do know which layer to activate on it, it will tell you if the county discontinued the road.
All right. So.
Excuse me, Jim, as a recap.
Yeah.
We're looking at amending one of the things to basically adopt more enforcement by the town to make the decision on what to do with the right of way. Is that where we're going here?
Yeah, we're looking to amend 2395 to make it clear that municipalities have the ability, they can exercise it, they don't have to, but they have the ability to temporarily close public easements as well as public ways in order to protect them. And then so that's what we're talking about. I will take a look at enforcement, who does it, and what the penalties are. Here's a suggestion. We're supposed to meet as a board, the whole commission, on August 8th. It would be nice if we could wrap this one up in a bow and make a recommendation to the commission and at least have this piece tied up. Can we meet in 2 weeks for 1 hour? And I'll have everything to you. I'll try to get it to you sooner in advance than that. So we do another noontime meeting. So during our lunch, we can have this time in 2 weeks, and I'll have that information for you, and then we can make a recommendation to the commission. Does that make sense?
July 23.
Yep.
Yeah, I will be at the Lewiston robotics camp that week, so hopefully they will be okay with my taking a lunch break too.
They're going to at least give you a lunch break, Roberta.
You know, I can pretty much guarantee I have an hour, but the second hour it gets iffy. The first half hour, the kids are eating lunch. The second half hour, they're supposed to have some educational presentation. But then after that, they go back to working with their robots.
Well, if I do my job right and make it concise and clear, I think that we should be able to wrap this up in an hour.
Karla, do you see any issues with what we've going at here today?
No, I think it's the right direction.
Okay, good. You do the by far extreme best example of taking back to your people and reporting back. So I just wanted to see if you saw hiccups.
No, not yet anyway.
Okay.
You didn't need to add that.
How many of you also are on the call for Group 2 next Tuesday? Okay. I have had a sudden monkey wrench thrown in my schedule, and I've been representing the city of Old Town in the Juniper Ridge landfill issue for about 15 years. And there is going to be a hearing that DEP is scheduled at the last minute, a public meeting in Orono that I'm going to have to attend. So I can't be two places at once. I can't clone myself. Human cloning is illegal. And so, yeah.
I could just reschedule it. I mean, we
Well,
have
Can we
enough
move it to like Wednesday
time.
that week?
We could do that Wednesday, or one of you could handle the meeting.
Wednesday was our second choice, I think. Tuesday was the first choice as being the easiest one they could spare me, but Wednesday, I think, was the second choice.
You know, I've got that Wednesday open if we could do that, and I'm awfully sorry. I just, when you've got something like this that DEP springs on you, there's not much. I can't ask DEP to change the date of their public meeting.
Oh, I bet
What
you
is,
can.
what is Group 2?
So that would be Wednesday the 17th at noon instead of the 16th for Group 2.
I'm
What
What
okay.
is Group 2 though? What is Group 2?
Oh, I'm sorry. Group 2 is dealing with the limited liability issue.
You know, trying to, because the landowners, in theory, have been told at least they can't do maintenance without being liable. So, and again, I can tell you right now, the thing that hogged up departments last year was this whole question: is Rebecca on this? Because she insinuated that this would extend that liability so somebody could literally go out and dig up Main Street and they wouldn't be liable. Well, that's a problem, obviously. So we got to make sure that whatever we're protecting is the discontinued road maintenance and not, you know, out onto the regular town maintained road.
Yeah, there's no way that anybody should be doing anything to a townway, a regular townway. Anybody who does so at his or her own risk, it's illegal. You'll be stopped immediately, and for good reason, because we as taxpayers are all going to be liable for whatever happens out there. So, okay. So we'll plan then on meeting as Group 1 in 2 weeks, noontime, the 23rd. And I will have stuff to you that week before so that there's time for everybody to take a look at it. I know what my assignments are, and we'll try to wrap this up so we can make that recommendation to the commission at the full meeting.
Now, are we changing this date or are you sending out a new invite, Heather?
I will send out a new invite and I will change Zoom and I'll send that out, cancel the old one. So
Okay.
it's not confusing because I think otherwise it would be confusing. Is
Right,
that-
probably. Some of us will show up in one and some will show up the other.
Well, and some of them aren't on because I think Catherine is in Group 2. So, and she looked like she was on, but then I saw her jump off, so
Isn't Chris on this Group 2 as well?
I think so. Yes. I had sent him an invite, so.
All right. Well, thank you for accommodating the schedule change, and I apologize. I try not to do this, but things happen.
Hey, it's all DEP's fault, not yours.
We can blame someone.
Those damn state agencies.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
there we go. Well,
I've
thank
had
you all.
enough. I'm getting out.
Yeah.
Here we go. Thank you all for your time
All
this
right.
afternoon. I appreciate
Have a good
it.
week.
See you in 2 weeks on this issue.
Thank you.